10, the Papal Schism, or Schism, who knows. Suffice it to say that the Pope is a pretty big deal in the Catholic realm of religion, pretty much the CEO of loving Jesus the most, but it is also a position of immense power, which means there is a lot of competition for the next one in line. Usually there is one reigning Pope at a time, but at one point there were 3 because there was so much rivalry. Between 1378 to 1417, there wasn't just one, not 2, but 3 rival popes, each with their own following of Sacred College of Cardinals. After 70 years of Pope Clement V living in Avignon, France, the Roman populace wanted a pope that was like at least Italian. Can we just get an Italian? When Pope Urban VI was elected, he proved so hostile that a bunch of cardinals went back to France and elected their own pope because the other one didn't count. They didn't like him. He thought he was voted in because people were afraid. They probably were. They elected Clement VII, who lived in France, so now there were 2 popes. 2 popes, as you can guess, had a disastrous effect on the church, so people were like, okay children, if you can't play nice, either both of you resign or we will pick one for you. The popes refused to concede because they were like, no, I don't want to be pope. So cardinals arranged for the Council of Pisa and elected a 3rd pope, because that'll solve everything, Alexander V, who succeeded John the 23rd. John formed the Council of Constance, then was kicked out of papacy by said council. Then the Roman Pope, who is now Gregory XII, resigned the Avignon Pope, who was dismissed. Eventually, the whole schism ended when Martin V was elected in 1417. It's just so confusing. I feel like I want to vomit. Too much. Too much popes.
On number 9, Bone Wars. The early days of paleontology were intense and pretty cutthroat. Since this was a relatively new science with a plethora of things to discover, so many researchers set out to learn and find as much as they could, and this created a lot of rivalries since everyone wanted to gain notoriety for their findings. The competition was intense, but nothing could ever measure up to the rivalry between Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope. These 2 rival paleontologists did everything in their power to throw each other off or to disprove them, and the lengths that they went to accomplish this was almost unbelievable. Both of them took off to Montana and Utah to dig up as many fossils before the other guy did, but they just didn't stop at digging. They each hired spies and saboteurs to get in the way of others' work, and they even tried to pass off fake skeletons as well. This is where we got the Brontosaurus controversy. One of the scientists had discovered the dinosaur known as Apatosaurus, and so the other one had to one-up him and introduced his own species named the Brontosaurus. The only problem with it though was the fact that it was a skeleton of the same dinosaur but with an intentionally placed skull from another dinosaur. It was a fake. This back and forth was intense in the scientific community and made for some pretty unbelievable stories.
Number 8, The Man in the Iron Mask. It is kind of crazy that the story actually exists, and it could be nothing. It could have been some dude who had syphilis who didn't want anyone to see his but the world remains convinced that he was more than he seemed. The movie, The Man in the Iron Mask with Leonardo DiCaprio, John Malkovich, has one theory that the man was actually the twin brother of the king. But the true identity of the Man in the Iron Mask remains a 350-year-old mystery. But it happened! In 1669, a man was arrested and put in prison for 30 years and was held in the infamous Bastille prison in France until he died in 1703. He was never seen without a black velvet mask or an iron mask, it's also described. No one knew who he was or for what possible reason he was put in there. The likes of Voltaire and Alexander Dumas tried to speculate who he was, and more recently Paul Saninio, a professor at the University of California, believed he was Eustache Dauger based on prison accounts and the guard. Dauger was in the prison at the same time as the masked man and was once transported in a chair covered so people wouldn't see him. But still, nothing has been confirmed, and I just think it's really cool and I like the speculation. Number 7, the big package. Okay, so technically this didn't happen, but it almost did. And the fact that it was even in the works, the fact that someone even thought of this and was like, yeah, that'll show the Russians. So ridiculous. No one really won the Cold War, but everyone has their perspective. But even today, the tensions between America and Russia are like pretty taut. Rather than all-out trench warfare, the Cold War consisted of espionage and psychological warfare on both sides. The CIA had many plans, and one of them may surprise you. In the 1950s, Frank Wisner took over the OPC, the central part of the CIA. He sketched out the idea of how to really emasculate the Russians. Under his leadership, they drafted out a plan to drop massive condoms labeled medium to make them think that the US was superior to them, all based on the size of their John Thomases. Because when it comes to deciding whether or not to nuke another country, size matters. They would make the Russians bow to their superior sexual prowess of American men. Oh, sorry, I just almost knocked myself out with that eye roll. Whoa. Needless to say, the plan never came to fruition.
At number 6, Rabbit Army. Weird question, but if you had to choose one animal to fight an army of, which animal would you choose? Well, whatever you choose, make sure it's not rabbits, because as fun as you think an army of rabbits might be, apparently they can be quite fearsome. In 1807, after signing the treaties of Tilsit, Napoleon wanted to celebrate a bit and he wanted to organize a rabbit hunt. He asked his chief of staff to organize the hunt, and apparently he went way overboard with the bunnies. Instead of rounding up a couple dozen rabbits, this man said, "Oh, you want rabbits? Alright, bet." And he got 3,000 rabbits. 3,000 rabbits! The rabbits were released into an open field for the hunt, and people thought that they would just flee and run away. But instead, the rabbits ganged up on Napoleon and his crew, and the bunnies charged at them. But don't worry, these bunnies didn't have a vengeance. They were just trying to make friends. You see, the chief of staff ended up getting tame farm rabbits, and they were already used to humans, so they just wanted to say hi. But could you imagine those first few moments of having 3,000 rabbits chasing after you?
Alright, number 5, the Great Whiskey Fire. Now we talked about the molasses explosion, this is kind of similar, but also I can't believe it. I love when bartenders set your drink on fire like they're magicians, but the Great Whiskey Fire is nowhere close to an outstanding whiskey sour dressed up in a coupe. In Dublin in 1875, 5,000 barrels of whiskey were ignited and made a river of fire in the streets of Dublin. The fire started at Malone's Malt House on Chamber Street, where the barrels were being stored. Once the fire touched the barrels, obviously they exploded into a whiskey lava river of death. Unless you love a hot toddy, that is. I know a hot toddy's made with rum. You could also use whiskey. Anyways, all you could basically do was run. It was like, it set fire to everything it touched. Water, sand, gravel were all useless against it, so Captain James Robert Ingram, the head of the fire brigade, suggested horse manure, and miraculously that worked, but imagine the smell. It was the most destructive fire in the history of Dublin, and 13 people died. As terrifying as this sounds, no one died from burns or suffocation from smoke inhalation. As the city was succumbing to the fire, crowds gathered around the pool of whiskey with pots, pans, hats, and boots to collect some for themselves. The people that did die died because they got alcohol poisoning from drinking the contaminated whiskey from the street. I shouldn't laugh at that, I'm sorry. You can't make this stuff up. It's one of the reasons Irish and whiskey go hand in hand. I mean, what? Don't drink whiskey that's a lava street covered in horse manure. Don't do that.
At number 4, Blue Eyes. The 1986 Chernobyl disaster is one of, if not the worst, nuclear disaster in history. The explosion was caused by a flawed reactor that was being operated on by inexperienced workers. The initial disaster took the lives of 31 people, and almost 500,000 people were evacuated from the area. So many lives were affected by the disaster and the intense nuclear radiation. The firefighters who battled the fires from the explosion were some of the most affected by the radiation, and it's almost unbelievable what happened to their physical appearances because of the exposure. According to records, their skin started peeling off and their eyes turned bright blue. One of the Chernobyl firefighters who was affected by the nuclear radiation had his eyes go from dark brown to light blue. He was so heavily affected by the radiation that when he was buried, he was put into a coffin sealed with zinc to counteract the radiation. At number 3, Chrysippus. You know how when you laugh really hard, you start gasping for air and your stomach starts to hurt from tensing up your body so much? Well, this once killed someone. A Greek philosopher named Chrysippus actually died from laughter. In the 3rd century BCE, the philosopher laughed so hard because he saw his donkey eating figs, and then he kicked the bucket, so to speak. According to science, death by laughter can occur because of asphyxiation, because you just can't breathe because you're laughing so hard, or through an aneurysm because of the tension from laughing. What's so wild about this is the fact that this wasn't the first time in history that death by laughter has happened. It is said that Cleopatra's father died the same way because he was laughing at the death of her husband, and a 5th century Greek painter met the same fate because he laughed too hard at one of his own paintings. And a Danish audiologist passed away in a similar fashion in 1989 because he saw a funny scene in a movie that raised his heart rate so much that he died.
Number 2, the first marathon. The Battle of Marathon is one of the most famous Greek battles in history, and it's also epic, and I also can't believe it happened because it's so cool. Back in 490 BC, the Greeks faced off against the invading Persians on the plains of Marathon. It was a victory that would go down in history as a testament to courage and excellence. But it wasn't only the battle itself, but a man named Phidippes whose actions were so insane, some people think it was a myth. He was sent to enlist the help of Spartans before the battle, so he ran to Sparta but stopped in Athens first. The total distance was 240 kilometers, like there and back. I can barely make 4 kilometers, imagine 240 kilometers on foot. He wasn't just like a basic guy though, he was what was called a hemerodromos, a sacred day-long runner in the military. They were known for covering incredible distances by foot, even foregoing sleep. They would most likely have consumed figs and cured meat, like that's it. His journey inspired the marathons run today, and even some have tried to make the exact trek he did. Meanwhile, it's a struggle for me to even do like a half-hour workout at the end of the day.
And finally, at number 1, Robert Liston. Robert Liston was probably the worst doctor in the history of medicine because he messed up so bad it is unbelievable. This surgeon in the 1800s performed a surgery that had a 300% mortality rate. So he went in to help someone and ended up killing 3 people as a result. Liston was performing a simple leg amputation, but was working so fast that he ended up cutting off 2 of his assistant's fingers during the procedure. Both the assistant and the patient ended up passing away after contracting gangrene. Now you're probably asking yourself, well, what about the 3rd person? You said this had a 300% mortality rate. Well, let me tell you how the 3rd person perished. During the procedure, Liston swiped near an elderly doctor with one of his blades. Thinking that he had been cut, the doctor started freaking out and went into shock. The stress was so much that the doctor ended up having a heart attack and passed away. So in the end, Robert Liston killed 3 people trying to save 1 life and failed miserably.
Number 10. Abe the Wrestler. At 20 years old with a record of 300 fights and 1 loss, he stands 6'4" at 185 pounds. Your future president of the United States, Honest Abe! The chair! Give him the chair! That's right, Abe Lincoln was quite the ruffian. However, the wrestling back then wasn't as organized as there was no WWF per se. It was mostly just a show of strength and skill, but they were competitions among men. Huge crowds gathered, towns watched, everybody gambled. It was great. A little wrestling. His fights earned him respect while campaigning too. He would even scrap hecklers at debates. Yeah, just walks down midpoint and wheeler whips someone under their neck. His chirps were amazing too. He would just look at people like Gladiator and call them out. He'd be like, hey, I'm the big buck of this lick. If any of you want to try it, come on and get your wet horns. Yeah, I didn't think so. Sorry, Mr. Douglas, proceed. Thank you.
Number 9. Roy Sullivan. They say lightning never strikes the same place twice, but if you knew Roy Sullivan, you knew that's not entirely true. Yeah, meet the man who was struck by lightning 7 times and lived to tell the tale. Roy Sullivan was born in 1912. He sadly passed away in 1983 when he was 71 years old, but God tried a few times to get him out earlier, it seems. He was born in Greene County, Virginia. Roy was a park ranger in Shenandoah National Park in 1936. He was nicknamed the Human Lightning Conductor, and he appeared in the Guinness Book of World Records. Roy's first encounter with, the might of Thor was when he was just 30 years old at the Fire Lookout Tower. He said that lightning strike, again out of the 7 he survived, was the most painful out of all of them. The lightning bolt burned a strip all the way down his leg, even blowing a hole through his shoe. Yet somehow he survived. Roy was also hit by lightning in 1969 while driving a truck, and also in 1970 while gardening on an otherwise clear day like today. Also in 1972 while inside a guardhouse. Also in 1976 during another storm, and finally in 1977 while fishing. Yeah, Roy passed away in 1983, and to this day 2 of his ranger hats are on display at the Guinness World exhibits in New York City and South Carolina. This man cheated death 8 times. 7.
Number 8. Miss Unsinkable. Violet Constant Jessup, aka the Queen of Sinking Ships, or Miss Unsinkable, was an Argentine-Irish woman who worked as an ocean liner stewardess, memoirist, and Red Cross nurse in the early 20th century. Jessup is well known for having survived 3 sinkings of major ships: the RMS Olympic in 1911, the RMS Titanic in 1912, and her sister the HMHS Britannic in 1916. Yeah, talk about the luckiest person ever. Lady's got some angels watching over her, I swear. The first ship, they turned around and made it back just in time. The Titanic, well, watch the movie, you'll understand. And then the third ship, it must have just felt personal by that point. Really? Not to mention barely surviving tuberculosis as a child. This woman is truly a saint. Returning to work after all those accidents, dedicating her entire life to the Red Cross, trying to save others. Sadly, she passed away at 83.
At number 7, Valentinian I. You know when you see someone get really mad and a lot of the time there's that one vein in their head that just pops out while their face turns red? Well, that thing unalived someone once. That's right, a person once got so unbelievably angry that they died. Roman Emperor Valentinian I was known to be a pretty hot-headed guy, and during his monarchy he had rivals in Danube called the Quadi tribe. Valentinian was very invested in this rivalry, and they were in constant conflict with one another. In November of 375 CE, Valentinian received a note from the Quadi tribe demanding that they be left alone in peace, as they supplied new troops to the army of Rome. On top of that, some Quadi troops also claimed that this whole feud between them and the emperor was because of the Roman forts that were built on their land. They even claimed that because of this, they weren't obligated to follow any of the terms of the Roman treaty, and that they could attack whenever they wanted. As you could imagine, hearing all the stuff from his rivals really ticked off the emperor. He got so mad that he started yelling at Quadi agents, and his yelling was so intense that a blood vessel in his brain ended up bursting and he passed away shortly afterwards.
Number 6, the Great Emu War. I thought this event was a joke for like a very long time, but like many on this list, it actually happened. It all started in 1932 when a large emu population began devastating farms. Many of the farmers were ex-soldiers, and after the devastation persisted, petitioned for military aid to defeat the pests. Keep in mind that emus can grow as tall as like 6.5 feet and have really sharp claws. They're fierce. We didn't know how fierce until the Minister of Defense, George Pierce, deployed troops and expected to eradicate the pests, I don't know, very quickly. But they were in for a surprise. They vastly underestimated these killer cunning birds, as they soon proved impossible to hit with machine gun fire. They just like barreled forward like Superman getting hit by bullets. Like they would, like it didn't even matter. They would get hit and then just keep running. They were so fast that even their vehicles couldn't keep up with them. It's so funny. Within a week, the military gave up and they killed only like 50 to 200 emus out of like 20,000 of them. George Pierce earned the title of Minister of the Emu War. What a way to go. Eventually they did try again later that November, which resulted in 284,700 deaths of emus between 1945 to 1960. But dang, that is some pest control. But we all know that girl on TikTok who has like emus and she like puts her hand out when they try and hiss at her. They needed her. She would have just like dummied the whole population and they would have followed her like the Messiah.
At number 5, atomic tourism. If you could do anything or go anywhere while on vacation, what would you do? Maybe go on a cruise or visit a tropical destination, but how about go and watch bombs get tested? Well, if you were around in the 1950s, then atomic tourism might have been one of your options for entertainment while on vacation. In the 50s, the US was expanding its arsenal of nuclear weapons due to the threat of the Soviet Union and their nuclear firepower. Because this was such a big thing, the Tourist Bureau of Las Vegas decided to profit off the US military's weapons testing and make an entire attraction out of it. Because testing for these nuclear weapons took place in the desert in Nevada, a tourist site was set up a safe distance away so that people could watch these weapons be detonated, as well as have a beautiful view of the Nevada horizon. People would bring picnics to watch the nuclear weapons, and at nighttime they would throw parties while they waited for the next explosion. It's such a weird tourist attraction, but then again, the 1950s were also a weird time anyway.
Number 4, Agent 355. So they are actually making a movie inspired by this one because of course it would make a great movie. Move over 007, there is a new agent in town and I smell an excellent film legacy brewing. After a hasty retreat made by George Washington leaving more control in British hands, he needed to come up with a stealthier way to retaliate. Thus, the Culper spy ring was born. This intelligence operation was so good at keeping secrets, some of the identities of the spies were never revealed, especially the identity of Agent 355. Not even Washington himself knew who was working for him or who was 355, but we do know that they were a female agent, a spy of expert skill. It was because of her that the head of England's intelligence, Major John Andre, was arrested. Notoriously handsome and debonair, 355 could have been any of the women that fawned over him at parties, gathering his secrets. One secret in particular was his plan to sell West Point to the British. After documents pertaining to his ordeal was uncovered, he was arrested and condemned. But as to who would be directly thanked for this capture was unknown. The only other suspected fact about her was that a female spy was reportedly killed on a prison ship in 1780. Of course, there are theories regarding her real identity, but Agent 355 was so good at her job that who she was and what else she did would be taken to her grave.
Number 3. Project MDXX. If you've seen Project X, this one's gonna ring a bell or two. About 500 years ago, yep, you missed it, in 1520, for 2.5 weeks in June, both England's King Henry VIII and Francis I, two of the greatest monarchs in Renaissance Europe, they both threw a joint birthday party that lasted 18 days, and it only cost about $19 million by today's standards. Nice. I went mini putting for my 8th birthday. That's why I called it Project MDXX. The numerals in the year, yeah, you get it, not bad. Not only was this a chance for them to celebrate their friendship, but it was also a chance for them to try and outdo one another and continue to show off. So for this huge bash, for starters, around 12,000 people showed up and gathered in the fields of the northern tip of what is now France. All tents, costumes, decorations were all gold embellished. Guests were fed 29,000 fish, 98,000 eggs, 6,400 birds, 2,200 sheep, and 216,000 gallons of wine just to wash all that clout down. On top of that, there were jousts, wrestling matches, elaborate mask parties. I have FOMO just talking about it right now. The two kings both wanted to outdo each other, but there were rules put in place beforehand. These kings could not compete with one another during the celebrations, right? So instead they tried to outspend each other in a nice way. They're like, oh yes, look at all of my gold. No, look at all my gold. We love blowing all of our resources in 2.5 weeks. Nice. Looking good, guys. Keep it up.
Number 2. Olympic arts. In the early 20th century, the Olympics were getting creative, literally. Hundreds of years of blood, sport, and victorious games, and people were looking for some new events. 1912 Summer Olympics, they decided to add official awarded medals for painting, sculpture, architecture, literature, and music. Alright. One rule though, they had to be of Olympic sport nature. Paintings of people boxing, sculptures of people whipping discs around, and of course a couple doodles of some dudes playing rugby. Which won Gene Jacoby 2 gold medals. Of course, these were Olympic grade pieces of art, so you know they were the best of the best. Of course, you could compete in both sport and art. American athlete Walter Winans took the podium after winning gold in sharpshooting, and also the very first gold in sculpture. Yeah, lovely. He made a little bronze horse pulling a chariot. Isn't that nice? People just taping up their wrists, mouth guards in, and you're just sharpening your pencil. Hey, how are ya? About to draw. Good luck.
And finally, number 1, Jurassic Timeline. Alright, this one goes out to all the T-Rexes out there. If you're watching, hit that thumbs up with your little hands. Nice big reach. Hit that subscribe button. When we think of the times of the dinosaurs, we tend to think of all of them roaming the planet at one time, and then a meteor hit, and then they were all toast. But that is certainly not the case. It's a little shocking, but here's our timeline. Dinosaur communities were not only spread apart by geography, but also by time and the age of the dinosaurs. For one, it lasted so long that it included 3 separate geological time periods. It's a long time. Fun fact, there is more time separating the Tyrannosaurus rex from the Stegosaurus than there is separating the Tyrannosaurus rex from humans. Yeah, that's how long ago dinosaurs have been kicking, or not kicking rather, you know what I mean? We can't comprehend this time. Like, this is so far away, it doesn't even make sense. We think of the ancient Egyptians and we're like, oh, that's, I don't know. Dinosaurs? Stegosaurus, you know those herbivores with the plates on their back and the spiky tails? They always do this and take out your cars, whatever. Jurassic World, I've seen it. They roamed Earth 150 million years ago during the Jurassic period and the age of the dinosaurs. And then the T-Rex first appeared about 80 million years after the Stegosaurus had been extinct. And that was about, 67 million years ago from today. This means that while 80 million years separated those two, there's only 67 million years that separate us from a T-Rex. Crazy fact. Hit that thumbs up.
At number 10, 18-month winter. If you live anywhere that gets harsh winters, then you know how annoying that it can be. Living in Canada, we know that all too well, and I can personally say that I despise winter. It basically lasts 6 months out of the year. If a 6-month winter sounds bad, then imagine how horrible an 18-month winter would be. In 1536 BCE, winter lasted a whole 18 months. Based on archaeological records, a thick dust veil and darkened skies caused temperatures to drop significantly in Europe and parts of Asia. This created some pretty frosty summers and harsh winters for those living in the area at the time. It is believed that this was all caused by a volcanic eruption that shot dust particles into the air, and they didn't dissipate for a long time. This phenomenon wasn't just a minor inconvenience to people though, and it greatly impacted the lives of many. It is believed that about a third of Europe's population was wiped out, and death rates soared to about 90% in northern regions. It was quite the catastrophe.
Alright, number 9, Andrew Jackson. You know when you get so frustrated with someone, you just take over and do it yourself? You're like, come on, just let me do it. Well, that's probably exactly what went through Andrew Jackson's brain when he was about to be assassinated because it was so poorly done. He survived 2 point-blank assassination attempts by the same guy, seconds apart. It was a cold, wet day in January in 1835, and Richard Lawrence waited behind a pillar inside the Capitol Rotunda. The aging president was there to attend a funeral, of all things, and Lawrence wanted to add one more body. He leapt from behind the pillar and fired. A loud bang went off, but the powder failed to ignite. Fail number 1. Andrew was not pleased, and despite his aging form, he was using a cane. He went at him with said cane. Lawrence quickly grabbed another pistol, and the same thing happened again. Misfire. Wow. You got so close, dude, and you really messed that up. During the trial, it was confirmed that Lawrence was indeed insane and thought he was the true King of England. And according to him, the only thing standing in his way to achieving true power was Andrew Jackson.
At number 8, Boston Toffee Apple Tsunami. Imagine a great wave of sticky syrup flooding your town. What would you do? Run? Hide? Have a quick snack? Well, for people in Boston in 1915, they didn't have enough time to think about those things when the Boston Toffee Apple Tsunami happened. On January 15, 1915, a 90-foot wide cast iron cask full of 2.5 million gallons of molasses suddenly exploded. The explosion caused a wall of molasses to shoot about 15 feet high at around 35 miles per hour. This sticky situation ended up destroying buildings, carried vehicles, and even drowned people and their horses. It is said that the Boston Toffee Apple Tsunami killed about 21 people and injured 150. As people started to come into the hospital after the incident, witnesses recalled the victims looking like toffee apples, which is where the name for the event came from. It took the city weeks to clean up the molasses, but even for years following the incident, people said that they could still smell the molasses in the air on a hot day.
Number 7. Lost at Sea. The Robertson family, they're quite a historical one. Strap in, folks. Back in 1971, Dougal, Lynn, and their 4 children, Anne, Douglas, Neil, and Sandy, all set sail on what was planned to be a trip around the world. It sounds magnificent. Our family saw a movie once. Aboard their 13-meter boat, the Lucette, they traveled through the Caribbean and then across the Panama Canal to the Pacific, right? That was their trail. A year and a half went by, they were en route through the Galapagos, and one of the daughters, Anne, who was 18, decided to leave the voyage. Yeah, she's like, you know what? I'm actually not on board for this anymore. I'm really seasick, bye. And then in Panama, they took on a hitchhiker named Robin Williams. Great name. This hitchhiker was in for more of an adventure than they thought, because after this point, their lives were never the same again. West of the Galapagos Islands, a pod of killer whales struck the boat. Wood then began to crack and the boat subsequently started to sink. They all moved to the inflatable life raft, but after 16 days of using their own breath to keep inflating it over and over 24/7, the 6 of them were sadly forced to relocate into an even smaller dinghy. Then they somehow survived for 38 days at sea, while sailing towards the center of the Pacific with no goal in mind other than to survive. All they had to drink was some water left over from the Lucette, with sea turtles being their only diet. Yeah, save the turtles, unless of course you're stranded at sea, then in that case, sorry to 52 of you. Finally, after 38 days, they were spotted by a passing Japanese fishing boat, and then thankfully they were rescued.
Number 6. Mad Jack Churchill. No, not that Churchill, but equally as British and even bolder. Mad Jack Churchill, aka John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, was a British Army officer who fought in the Second World War with a longbow, bagpipes, and a Scottish broadsword. Dude, this guy lived a life. was in like every war. Trained people how to fight and how to parachute. This guy was fighting machine guns with a bow and a sword. And was at like the front of the lines, leading them. Taunting people, playing the bagpipes. You know how intimidating that is? How is there not like 15 movies about this guy? Not only did he thrive in the rough stuff, guy revolutionized surfing. He was also pissed the Americans dropped some nukes. He wanted to keep fighting, you know? Like imagine that pep talk. Alright lads, I'm gonna play a wee jingle here first and then I'm gonna go take this sword and I'm gonna start swinging. Alright? Good luck.
Number 5. Fake friends. Towards the end of World War I, Paris was tired of, seeing their city of love get blown to smithereens, as one would. So they figured, you know what? Let's try and fool those Germans, alright? Let's try and do some trickery. Let's just build a fake Paris and then shut out all the lights. And it worked. Yeah, they psyched them out. They created a decoy, a very large decoy. The life-size stunt double was posted up only a few miles west of the actual city in order to protect it. This tiny town called Masons Lafayette, now of course it's looking a lot more full than it was when it was, a hollow shell of a fake town, now it's a tourist area. There were once 3 different zones set up around the real Paris. Zone A was northeast of the city, had fake train stations, mimicked a suburban region of St. Denis, but it had a big fake Gare du Nord train station, right? That was the main pull. Like, hey, come on, we're looking nice and hopeful, come attack us, and it worked. Zone B, northwest of the city, that was Masons Lafayette, the main fake Paris, right? And Zone C was the industrial area, just east of the city. They had massive factories built with, obviously nothing inside of them. This sounds pretty Home Alone when you think of it, but these missions only happening overnight, creating a light show with some big fancy props isn't a bad idea. It's gonna save a lot of lives and money. Lights were carefully spaced out so it looked like a breathing city from above, and they fell for it, for some of the time. They Looney Tuned the Germans, and it worked. They're like, yeah, it's Paris. Hit that really fast, it's good.
Number 4. Space junk. In 1961, John Glenn would become the first astronaut to successfully orbit in space. He lapped the Earth a couple times with the help of Friendship 7, NASA's command mission pushing ever closer and closer to the moon. While in space, Glenn and fellow crew noticed tiny gold particles that shone like fireflies. Quote, this is Friendship 7, try to describe what I'm seeing up here. It's a big mass of some very small particles that are brilliantly lit up like they're luminescent. I never saw anything like it. They're round a little, they're coming out of the capsule, and they just look like stars, a whole shower of them coming over. They had come to the conclusion it was liquid from inside the capsule and the suits leaking out. And that liquid was urine. Not aliens, not fireflies, not disintegrating ship, frozen pee-pee. Yeah, guess drinking all that Tang all day. Glenn flew on Discovery in 1998 and became, at age 77, the oldest person to fly in space. At the time. Damn Shatner.
Alright, this one's super cute and you might die, so get ready. Number 3, Sergeant Stubby. I already know this movie is gonna make me cry. Dogs, man. If dogs are in movies, I'm done. We really don't deserve dogs, okay? We don't. Sergeant Stubby was actually a real heroic doggo. While training for combat in 1917, Private Robert Conroy found a little brindle puppy with a short tail. He named him Stubby, and little did he know that he would become a decorated war hero. Stubby became their mascot for the 26th Yankee Division 102 Infantry. He learned bugle calls, the drills, and even like a little doggy salute. He would lift his right paw and just salute his head, and was the only animal allowed at camp. Conroy snuck him aboard the SS Minnesota, and the crew was won over by him, obviously because he was so cute. How could you not? They brought him to the front lines and Stubby saved life after life. He woke soldiers during a gas attack, he rescued fallen soldiers on the battlefield by following the sound of English calls he could distinguish the languages, even captured an enemy spy. After this incident, he was promoted to Sergeant Stubby. Because how can you not? He captured an enemy spy, he did his job. Sergeant Stubby served and survived 17 battles, staying with Conroy even until after the war. He finally passed away in 1926, his service complete.
Alright, at number 2, Hubert the Hippo. You've probably never heard of Hubert the Hippo, South Africa's most famous hippo, so I'm going to tell you about her and what made her so extraordinary. In 1928, Hubert the Hippo walked 1,600 kilometers or 1,000 miles, traveling from her home in the St. Lucia estuary to East London. Huberta became quite the celebrity on her journey as she drew in large crowds of people wanting to see her and give her food. Along her journey, she even stopped at a country club, a theater, and even the beach. After failing to capture Huberta, she was officially declared royal game, meaning no one could harm her. Sadly, however, just a month after arriving in East London, she was shot by a couple of farmers. People were so upset that these farmers harmed Huberta that they demanded their arrest. The farmers were arrested and fined £25, which was a lot back then because it was the Great Depression. Huberta's body was given to a taxidermist in London, and in 1932, Huberta's body was sent back to South Africa, where thousands of people gathered to welcome her home.
Number 1, last but not least, Ching Shi. I love Pirates of the Caribbean. It's my jam. Pirate!
Yee.
Before I knew how bad pirates would actually smell in real life, Jack Sparrow. Loved him, but really couldn't get like 6 feet next to him. He would have smelled so bad. But a movie series seriously needs to be made about Ching Shi. Her story is incredible. She became known as the terror of South China due to her massive fleet of over 50 to 70,000 pirates. She started out working as a woman of the night until one night she met Cheng Yi, the pirate captain who ruled over the Red Flag fleet. The captain proposed to her and she said yes under the condition that they would share the power of the fleet and the plunder. Together, they launched a fleet of over 1,800 ships. They were highly organized, ruthless, and disciplined. Sadly, 6 years into their marriage, her husband died, leaving Ching Shi alone to rule. She ran a tight ship, handing out fierce punishments to all those who disobeyed her orders. She was strict with her prisoners, keeping her men in check. Should any woman be taken in, should they take a wife, fine, but they had to remain faithful. If they didn't, well, dead. If they took a woman against her will, dead. Any who deserted would be hunted down and tortured, then killed. The Red Fleet eventually felt like a floating country, even routinely taxing villages. The Chinese government eventually realized they couldn't defeat her. They were so scared, so instead of going to battle, they made a bargain. A bargain that allowed her to retire to wherever she liked with all of her riches and her new bow. So, it's good to be a pirate queen.